Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Uwe Brandis. I'm professor of the practice at Georgetown University, and I'm serving as the principal investigator of the Science-Based Targets for Faith project. I'm here together with Alberto Palecki of the World Resources Institute, and we are absolutely delighted to convene this morning, reflect on the colloquium that we hosted on the campus of Georgetown yesterday, hear from some of our speakers, entertain questions, comments, and this session is being recorded. We look forward to sharing this with a much broader audience in the coming weeks and months. I'd like to, first of all, welcome everyone to Georgetown University. We hosted the event yesterday. Georgetown, as many of you know, is a Jesuit institution. It's the oldest university, Catholic university in the United States, the oldest university in Washington, D.C. And it is our absolute honor to be partnering with the World Resources Institute on this very important project. And with that, Alberto, I'd like to hand it over to you to offer your welcome.
Thank you so much, Uwe. The pleasure is all ours. I'm Alberto Palecki, Acting Director of WRI Faith and Sustainability. And WRI has been working in the last 35 years to address some of the most pressing issues at the nexus of environment and development. And now, since a couple of years, 2.5 years, we also decided to establish WRI Faith and Sustainability, an initiative that envisions a world where faith-based organizations are climate leaders, utilize their influence and operate their assets in an environmentally and societally positive manner. And that's the reason why we decided to partner with Georgetown on this project that we will tell you shortly a little bit more.
That's great. I wanted to just very quickly review the structure of the colloquium that we conducted yesterday. It was an all-day convening with many different voices and perspectives. After a welcome, we had a first panel, which was really a framing panel. And this morning we'll hear from one of the speakers, President Susan Hendershot from the Interfaith Power and Light. And then we moved on to a second panel, which were voices of leadership from the pilot phase of our project. And we have two speakers today who will join us this morning who spoke in that. We'll do those introductions shortly. And then we had a third panel, which was, again, kind of a framing panel exploring how communities of practice form in order to advance energy management, energy disclosure. And then we had final reflections. As has been circulated in the emails prior to this, for a detailed view of the agenda, you can visit the webpage for the event at globalcities.georgetown.edu. What I'd like to do now is invite Alberto, and I'll join him to walk through an overview of the SBTF project. And with that, Alberto, take it away.
Thank you so much, Uwe. So just a little bit of context. Most of the people of this call, I expect, have something to do with the field that we work on. But it's always useful to repeat why we're doing this. And it is whether we know that a huge amount of people around the world, 8 out of 10, affiliate with the religion. This is an old stat, but we expect is still fairly accurate as of today. We all know that religion has been always important throughout the history for what people value, embrace, and protect. And I think it's fair to say that almost all, if not all religions, view the earth as a divine creation that requires responsible stewardship. Next slide, please. We were also reflecting when we established WRI Faith and Sustainability on what could be the role of an organization like WRI, very secular, science, evidence-based organization that has been working for years with businesses, with governments, but really not much with groups like faith-based organization to actually engage in this conversation. And we realized that there is a huge, largely untapped potential. At the same time, we also feel that there are still in this sector quite some knowledge, data, and especially capacity gaps for what pertains project planning and project implementation. We also found through our scoping that most of faith-based organizations don't necessarily focus their full potential to evidence-based commitments, and very often there is limited adoption of science-based targets. So there is a lot of momentum, a lot of action, especially at the local level, a bit less commitments that are evidence-based, Paris-aligned, and so on. And we all know in today's world that it's fair to say we are losing the fight against many of the issues that we care about. And we do need to create innovative partnerships. We need to put everybody on the front line of this fight that we are fighting to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Accord. Next slide, please. So Uwe and I, together with our good partners at Porticus Foundation, had a dream when we started this project just 16 months ago. We wanted to advance a global standard for faith-based organizations to measure, manage, and report the greenhouse gas emissions in a way that was fully aligned with the Paris Climate Agreement. So we have, for example, many initiatives out there for the business sector. We have the Science-Based Target Initiative that also we heard from yesterday presentation of a colleague at WRI, that became kind of the gold standard for how business account their emission. We still don't have something similar for faith-based organizations. So we wanted to contribute to this discourse to publish something that will guide faith-based organizations on how to set targets, how to account for their emissions. Next slide. So we have three main goals for this project. We're obviously looking into physical assets, and the starting point is really to assess the emissions impact of faith-based organization on the physical assets that they own or they control. This is to inform target setting. So the next phase after making an assessment is to really try to pilot, to develop. We did quite some work to put together a methodology that was science-based aligned, that was Paris aligned, to do climate mitigation on the scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, so the direct emissions of a faith-based organization. And lastly, third project goal, data is super important. We always found that there is a lot of data scarcity and in terms of reporting, in terms of how faith-based organizations account on their emissions. So putting together a data hub, developing a digital data hub for faith-based organizations to report their emission, to set targets, and to track progress targets through time. Next slide, please. We also had quite some fun during the project to try to define what a faith-based organization is. And we found quite some different definitions. You could consider the definition of faith actors, whether it's an organization that is involved in worshiping, that has an explicit focus on providing purely religious service. You have religion institutions, so institutions that exist to support and manage the practice of a specific set of religious belief. And then we have probably the kind of broader definition that we tend to use, which is FBOs, faith-based organizations, which in our opinion are religiously influenced organizations or institutions which have an explicit goal and focus on providing services. So it could be a religiously affiliated hospital, a religiously affiliated school, a university like Georgetown University. So inside the category of FBO, we can actually place so many different type of assets, and we will tell you a little bit more about the assets shortly. Next slide. So why faith-based organizations? Globally, faith-based organizations are uniquely positioned to contribute to climate mitigation, in the opinion of this project. And they can do so by inspiring environmental actions around the world, given the scale of assets that they influence over and the ability to forge what people value, embrace, and protect, as I just mentioned. So it's the assets that they own, it's the community impact that they can bring. Think about all the potential to shift individual consumption patterns, to shift minds and souls of their millions of followers around the world. But it's also financial assets. So it's hard to actually estimate how many millions, billions of dollars faith-based organization control around the world. But how this finance is used and accounted for is also very important to this discourse. Next slide, please. And we also know that faith-based organizations are already doing work in this sphere, in the sphere of tracking emissions. Here you see some of the most famous initiatives. And yesterday during the presentation, we heard about some of the best initiatives out there. Susan Hendershot, that is here today, presented, president of the Interfaith Power and Light, spoke about the Cool Congregation tool. Jerry Lawson, manager of the Energy Star project at APA, told us about the fantastic work of the portfolio manager. Or again, we had Liore Milgrom Gardner, Climate Action Director at Adama, telling us about the Hudson Seal of Sustainability. And all those incredible initiatives have been consulted as part of the creation of the Science Based Targets for Faith project. We try to learn from them. We try to understand where were the gaps, what could actually bring about a more solid way, more globally applicable way to actually account for emission for faith-based organizations. Next slide. And I gave it back to Uwe.
Great, thank you. So Alberto talked about the diversity of FBO organizations, and even within the diversity of organizational types, there is an enormous diversity with respect to organizational governance. So we're dealing with a very, very diverse set of both actors and assets. And this, in fact, was one of the key points made by one of the keynote presentations in the morning by Professor Chris Pike, professor at Georgetown, who really underscored the need to be explicit in this work with respect to entities that control real assets. And in this kind of collection of real property owned by or controlled by faith-based organizations, we really have you know, a dramatic mix of types of real assets. I think what typically comes first to mind are places of worship. And of course, those are an important kind of asset. But FBOs, again, either own or control many other kinds of assets, many other kinds of buildings, and one can imagine hospitals, one can imagine schools and universities, but then also just regular offices, certainly housing and affordable housing, and then extending beyond real estate to vehicles and fleets and land holdings as well. So one of the first activities that we undertook was to understand what the total addressable market is associated with global FBO real assets. And remarkably, there is very little literature on this, and there's very little easily accessible information. So after curating a comprehensive literature review, our working understanding of the answer to this question, and I invite everyone on the call to kind of close your eyes for a moment here. Imagine flying over New York City and seeing all of the buildings in New York City. Take all of those buildings and multiply them by 6, and that's the number of buildings that we believe are owned by FBO organizations around the world. So 6 million buildings, 6 million kind of data objects, if you will. And then in terms of land, imagine flying over all of Mexico. And that's the approximate equivalent of what we believe are in the land holdings globally. You know, these are kind of estimated numbers interpolated from the literature review that we performed. And there's much more refinement and precision that is needed in this area. So FBOs and climate change, we know that the exposure of these assets to people around the world is enormous. Importantly, and we'll hear from the Joint Learning Initiative in a moment, but many of these assets, as they're distributed around the world, are actually at the front line of climate adaptation. They are being impacted, certainly on the basis of the mission of so many FBOs. These are assets that are embedded within vulnerable communities around the world. And so these assets represent the front line of climate adaptation. FBOs are, of course, also leading global advocates on climate change. And yet, as Alberto has already outlined, the practice of disclosing energy and carbon performance is an emerging practice, and the access to quality data is a major challenge. There are many reasons why we believe there is a positive value proposition associated with this project. As everybody on the call knows, your ability, any entity's ability to manage their energy costs has a potential direct positive financial impact. There's great gains to be achieved in growing administrative capacity over these real assets. This is a prime opportunity for mission advancement, attaining goals, extraordinary opportunities associated with education and advocacy once this data and goal setting is established. And beyond building community, there's also, importantly, an opportunity to manage risk. We heard from that yesterday from our partners in the Philippines. So as we have gotten this project off the ground, we started with the formation of this partnership between the World Resources Institute and Georgetown University. We've started with a lot of different research activities. We've formed an advisory group. We've importantly, and I'll mention in a minute, developed an intake survey in order to be able to receive and host data. Performed a lot of outreach and are working on lots of technical assistance, guidance documents. And then what we'll hear from in a second is the experiences of this pilot phase, this first phase to directly engage FBOs around their energy performance data.
Thanks, Uwe. Just shortly on the technical guidance. This is one of the key outcomes, outputs of this project. It's currently undergoing our WRI internal peer review process, internal and external review, of course. And it's composed by 5 key elements. It starts with the greenhouse gas inventory. So it drives an organization, a fair-based organization, on how to actually account on their emission on the scope 1 and scope 2 sector. And this is built on a greenhouse gas protocol corporate standard that we know this is really the first attempt for FBOs to do so in a total alignment with this standard. Next point. Thanks so much. We also provide guidance on how to set science-based targets. So we explain the science behind SBTS. We provide an overview on the different paths to reach net zero. We try to demystify a little bit what carbon neutral, what climate neutral means. And we also advise organizations to set near and long-term targets. Near targets helping you to get there. Long-term targets being very useful to have an horizon that you want to achieve. Third, we obviously need to measure in order to reduce. And we also try to focus on providing initial thoughts on scope 3. This technical guidance, this first phase of the project is not equipped to account for scope 3. We hope to be able to expand this project into the scope 3, the indirect world of emissions in the next iteration. But we also provide in the technical guidance initial thoughts on what these are and what we can do about it. Next. Fourth, we provide advice on how an FBO could reach operational net zero. This could be an interim milestone that FBO can pursue on the scope 1 and scope 2. We dubbed it operational net zero to avoid confusion with full-fledged net zero. And lastly, fifth point, it's also important not only tracking, but also communicating progresses, celebrating success. So we provide information to contextualize and to make communications more easy for fair-based organizations that join this process.
So as we have designed this tool, there are certain principles that we've embraced in order to do this. First of all, we're trying to make this as simple as possible in order to establish this tool as an accessible tool that collects data which is accessible to organizations. Second principle is that it's interoperable. In other words, this effort does not seek to supplant or replace any other existing effort to manage energy performance that any other organization has already initiated. We are seeking to create an interoperable platform, and we have embraced the data taxonomy that has been established by the United States Environmental Protection Agency. We are trying to make this as flexible as possible to allow both small organizations and very large organizations to contribute their data. Importantly, we are embracing the World Resources Institute developed greenhouse gas protocol, the corporate standard, which is the accounting standard that has been established and is well accepted around the world. We've incorporated into the tool the establishment of both baseline data and emissions reduction targets, which in turn relate directly to the Paris Agreement. And all of this, as Alberto just said, is set up and really prepares organization to make a public disclosure. Here's just a snapshot, a screenshot of the tool itself, just to give an example. I'm not going to go into the technical data fields right now, but this is just to give a sense for how organizations can contribute data. Importantly, I think it's just to acknowledge that at this stage of the project, we are limiting the data collection to scopes 1 and 2. Here are some of the actual properties that produce data through the tool. And at the moment, at the beginning of this pilot phase, we have about 250 properties, data for 250 properties in the data hub. Lots of challenges. This is not easy work. There are always challenges associated with accessing data, producing it, organizing it. So these are just some examples of challenges that organizations faced when producing the data. And again, and just to kind of review the overall challenges, we've got multiple asset types. So an individual house of worship and a complex hospital data that we're trying to collect. Organizations have limited access to data. There's always a capacity question with respect to data collection. Just response rates and fear of public scrutiny of data was an issue that we've discussed a lot about. Lack of education, professional expertise, and of course, always a scarcity of incentives and available resources to dedicate to these efforts. With that, Alberto, why don't you introduce Susan, and we can offer some reflections from yesterday's discussion.
Certainly, we are very happy of having Susan yesterday, even the day before at WRI. She has been fantastic these days, and this is a partnership that we're establishing with Interfaith Power and Light. So without further ado, Susan, thank you so much for being here today. Just offer you the opportunity to reflect briefly on this and on what you heard yesterday.
Thank you so much, Alberto and Uwe. It's a pleasure to be with you again today virtually. And yeah, I just want to offer sort of a few brief reflections. First of all, thanking you for this emerging partnership. We're very excited to be working with you and learning together about what faith communities need. As I shared yesterday, Interfaith Power and Light works with faith communities all around the United States, both through our national office, which I head, but also, and more importantly, to a project like this, through our state and regional affiliates that are located all across the United States. So they are very much the practitioners on the ground who are working hand in hand with faith communities and building those relationships and those strong partnerships on the ground. And, we really couldn't do this type of work without that piece of relationship building, because as we know, building trust is a big part of efforts like this. And it's one of the reasons that I think that, as you saw, the array of organizations that are that offer some kind of tools for religious communities to measure their footprints. I think that's important because I think the messenger also matters. So, the Catholic Church is the right messenger to the Catholic community, and, and having Episcopal and evangelical and interfaith organizations who are providing tools is a great way, because it's important to see yourself in the solutions, I think. And sometimes that's difficult for some faith communities. And one of the things that I would say, so again, we have this Cool Congregations tool that we started in 2007, actually, working with faith communities to measure their carbon footprints and to sort of handhold them in making practical investments that were going to make a difference in their overall energy use, and also very practically in their utility bills, because often, that's a large part of a congregation's budget. And if you can lower the amount of money that you're paying to your utility, you obviously have more money that you can put towards your mission, which is what we think is very important. And so, one of the things, so what I want to emphasize is, I think in this, we have to move together past competition to collaboration, right? We know that the resources are available. It does not further any of our work when we are in competition with one another for those resources. Instead, we are going to get further faster in collaboration with one another. And we understand that, for example, in this partnership, there are a lot of ways that the work is complementary. And so, for example, through WRI and through Georgetown, we have data experts, we have analysts, we have, scientists, we have the folks with the tools and the knowledge that we need in order to set clear targets and clear goals for faith communities. And what organizations like Interfaith Power and Light bring is, we bring communities of practice, right? You actually need to implement these things on the ground in communities. We bring values which motivate people's behavior. So we speak the language of the faith communities. And I think most importantly, well, maybe not most importantly, but certainly very importantly, we bring stories. And I think the stories at the end of the day are what motivate people to take action. So we can tell stories of faith communities that have gone through our Cool Congregations program. They have submitted their projects to our Cool Congregations Challenge. They win in various categories, including renewable energy and energy efficiency and land stewardship and electric vehicles and so on. And when we tell those stories, other faith communities can see themselves in the solutions. And also, as we know, they are models for behavior in communities. So it is not just the faith community themselves that are implementing the project, but it ripples out to their congregants, to their members. It ripples out to business owners in their community, other congregations in their community, and so they do serve as models of behavior. And we think that is one way that we move together. And I think one of the things that we also say is, by modeling this behavior, we're actually not asking governments, for example, to do anything that we're not already doing ourselves. And I think that is also very important. We are doing the work on the ground that we are also asking others to do, because we know it's going to take all of us working together to win on this issue. And so again, I do think the messengers matter. And I think, we talked about some of the challenges that exist. And I mean, certainly one of the challenges that we have found is it is incredibly hard to gather data. You are working for the most part with volunteers in these, small faith communities who don't have, sort of an expert, portfolio manager on their staff who is doing this data collection. And so it can be sort of hit or miss. And it's a lot of like one-on-one conversations and hand-holding. And we had a conversation on Wednesday at the WRI offices, which is like, well, how are we finding out like actually how many congregations in the US have installed solar on their buildings or on their property? And it's really hard to find that data. We do it primarily through sending out a survey to our supporters and getting a lot of information back, but we also need to be doing it collaboratively with other organizations so we can get a more full picture, because we know ours is only a partial snapshot. And then the other thing I would just mention really briefly is that we know that faiths are often left out of processes like, the COP, the global processes that we have in place. We're often taken for granted. And yet, just on the economic case alone, you see like how many buildings we own, how much land we own, how many forests we manage, what are our investment portfolios, so even if we're not even talking about, the larger picture of what faiths bring, simply on economics, there is a strong case to be made for centering faiths in the solutions, because at the end of the day, I think it isn't just an economic transformation that we need, but it is a spiritual, ethical, and moral transformation that we need in order to actually win on the issue of change. So we're super appreciative of this new partnership. We're looking forward to what comes next. And I'll just stop there and say thank you again for the opportunity to be here.
That's great. Thank you so much. Alberto, why don't you continue?
Yes, so we are giving the floor to our next guest, Olivia. She has been a fantastic partner together with the JLI team on the Science-Based Target for Faith project. She has been working on this case study in the Philippines. I cannot wait to hear more also for the others, to have a little bit of the sense of what we have been doing on the ground, what are the possibilities to actually perform inventories and to survey on the ground in countries in the south of the world. Olivia, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Alberto. Thank you for the invitation. Good to see you all. So I'll explain a little bit more about the work that we've been doing. It's a collaboration between the Joint Learning Initiative on Faith and Local Communities, which is where I work as Director of Research. But almost most importantly, we collaborated with two institutions in the Philippines. So firstly, the Episcopal Church of the Philippines as the religious institution that we were measuring the emissions from their assets. And then also with the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, who are local experts in measurement of emissions. They had experience working with their local municipalities, for example, but they hadn't worked with faith actors. So the combination of our experiences, I think, was really interesting and valuable for us all, and we all learned a lot from each other. The Episcopal Church of the Philippines was also, we were just very lucky to be in the right place at the right time in terms of their interest and commitment to work on this project. They had recently had a statement from their bishops, for example, that they needed to focus on this even more. And collectively, they knew that they had done various activities across all their dioceses across the country, but they hadn't got a good picture overall. And they really saw the opportunity of this pilot project to help them with their needs. So the fact that we proposed the pilot project to them when they had this need was just very, very good timing on all fronts. So we co-designed our pilot survey, a survey of the emissions of the Episcopal Church of the Philippines together. And this produced a really wonderful, back and forth process of figuring out how to work with the scientific experience of the University of the Philippines, our experience researching faith actors, and then the very practical knowledge of the Episcopal Church of the Philippines and how their network works. We did look at the similar surveys that have already been mentioned to inspire our work, but we also realized how much adaptation those needed because of the context of the Episcopal Church of the Philippines, meaning that, some of the things that were perhaps assumed for other surveys, for example, were just not going to be possible in this context. So all the challenges that we have already talked about really came to light many times over for us. There wasn't an inventory of all the assets of the Episcopal Church of the Philippines. That had to be completed before we could even start rolling out the pre-test and then the full rollout of the survey. Many of the assets did not have their records of their utility bills, for example. Many of them just even full stop did not have utility bills. They were getting their energy from different sources that was not going to be measured by some utility authority. And so we needed to devise measurements that could be used to estimate their emissions. And that was quite a complicated process. In the end, we did develop, then pre-test, then roll out the survey with 177 of the Episcopal Church of the Philippines assets responded. So this is mostly churches, but also schools, hospitals, commercial buildings. They have farmers' cooperatives, for example, on some of their land throughout the country. And we found that individually, churches emit the least, but because they make up the majority of the Episcopal Church's assets, they represent the highest proportion of overall emissions. Breaking down emissions into 4 categories of energy, water, waste, and refrigerants, we found that the majority of emissions for churches come from energy, and schools have more emissions from water and refrigerants, but they were very different pictures between those different categories of churches, schools, hospitals, etc. Our gap is now to turn those measures into targets. So I am very excited to see the work coming out of the other partners on this call. I think I do have a few reflections coming from the conversations we've had in the last few days, and one of them is how much we need this knowledge exchange, because there are lots of parallel efforts potentially happening, and I mean, Susan was just saying it as well, like it's not competition, it's collaboration that's needed most of all, and I think that we have a lot to learn from everyone else and what has been developed, and I hope that some of that learning can be transferred for the Episcopal Church of the Philippines. And we want them to be able to duplicate this, do this in the future easily, regularly, be able to analyze the data without having all the additional support that was needed from the University of the Philippines, for example. But we also want to be able to replicate this. We want to be able to replicate this in other equivalent religious institutions, and also then move to what in JLI we would call the faith-based organizations, such as World Vision, Islamic Relief, those big NGOs with faith bases as well, because they have considerable assets. They are huge organizations in some ways, and the ability to understand what's going on with them would be very, very fascinating too. And I think that would, we're only scraping the surface of the possibilities with them as well. So there's lots and lots of future exciting avenues to work on and go down. The Episcopal Church of the Philippines is very committed to keep working on this, and so we hope to continue that while also expanding the possibilities with other partners as well. So I'm grateful to be part of this and hope to keep talking to everyone here as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olivia. And we are also very excited that this publication, this joint publication between WRI and the Joint Learning Initiative is going to see the light very soon. We are at the final stage of the review process. Our last speaker for today, before we open up for questions and reflections, is another speaker from yesterday, Colloquium, Reverend Matthew Calkins. He's director of the Grace Church Millbrook from the Episcopal Church in the state of New York. It was very inspiring to hear from him yesterday, his perception on how it is to engage community in rural America and way much more. So Matt, the floor is yours. Thanks for your reflection.
Thank you, Alberto, and thank you, Uwe. did an amazing job working with Madeline, Chandon, Maitreya on creating this project and working with, our project over the summer of the practitioners. So as a lowly parish priest practitioner, I'm just overjoyed to be with this distinguished group of researchers and organizational heads. From my perspective, not only as a parish priest, but as co-chair of the Diocese of New York's Creation Care Committee and working church-wide on some of these particular goals of creating carbon tracking tools and targets. This has been really, really helpful. And I want to definitely echo Olivia's hope that we can continue collaborating. And I'm very excited about what happened in the Church of the Episcopal Church in the Philippines and how they embraced this project led by the bishops using research tools and outside collaborators. So, we'll bring the Bishop of the Philippines in and talk to us in New York at our conference. That'll be exciting. I thought each of the speakers in these yesterday, from Father DuPont on bringing the faith and values to the market and confronting the dual market failures across countries and space and across generations. I would add across classes, so that the faith community brings that hugely important missing piece to where the market's risk assessment and other incentives to reduce carbon are working very well. And that came very clearly from Mr. Danielson, showing how the WRI initiative SBTFI has taken off among businesses. So that was encouraging because as you note, Alberto, we're sort of losing the fight and losing time. And so that's so critical that there is some momentum, at least in that. As far as learnings, my goodness, Chris Pike, just a torrent of information on entities and assets. And so I actually bring that back because I'm often thinking of bottom-up initiatives, but both Olivia's presentation and his spoke about kind of entity level direction being so critical and the leadership involving that. So that was a really good thing. And the folks working in the Jesuit community in Europe on the fabric of St. Basilicas, the Hazom and other initiatives, cool congregations, all those very inspiring to me. My own takeaways, I think, we discussed this idea of this initiative seeks to bring in the faith-based organizations as the missing piece, who bring a huge set of population and assets to bear. But the challenge of trying to organize them to get these cats herded to all collaborate on unified sets of data, and even to have the assets to collect the data, let alone the targets. So I bring my personal perspective to that. As Thomas and I presented, we had developed a survey tool in 2019, and of course in COVID, it's a challenge to get good data as far as what your real usage is of property when you're not having worship in person. But we put out this survey tool. We found it to be too complex. Of the 181 congregations, something like 26 or 30 were able to fill it out, and not all of them correctly. It was a little too complicated. And we also realized that having a sort of mandatory process would really help. So I'm in the not only the work of simplifying the survey tool so that it conforms both to what's coming out here with the WRI survey tool aligned with EPA and the Paris Accords, so that we get the net operational zero numbers to begin the baselines and then set the short-term goals per congregation, but that this works through that parochial report mandated reporting tool that we already have in the Episcopal Church church-wide. And so working with the Diocese of California and others, their current carbon tracking tool is a household-based and it's not mandatory, so it's gotten very little usage. You saw it in the right corner, Sustaining Island home in that presentation. So I'll be in conversation with the creators of that to try to create a congregational assessment that is filled out in our mandatory annual parochial report. And that will hopefully fill into this data set so that we're beginning to be a part of a larger work and keep up these connections so that we might be, part of this work as the Episcopal Church. But beyond that, we also hope to develop what's known as the Anglican Forest. And I don't know, Olivia, if you've in England been part of this, but I think it came out of Church of England. And it's reforestation, regenerative agriculture use, so that not only we work on the front of reducing carbon emissions in our local context and developing solar and other energy efficiencies, but that we work perhaps even globally where necessary or across space lines to help those places. I was so impressed by the Philippines being on the front lines of climate change. Thank you for somebody putting that chat in there. And I'll just say that that's my hope, that we all can come back from this with such great information and connections and continue the good fight that Alberto is calling and Uwe is calling us to. Thank you.
So thank you again to all of our speakers today. Thank you to all of our speakers yesterday. What we wanted to do now is spend a little bit of time in an open forum context. If I see people are using the chat, which is wonderful. If anyone has any questions or comments or ideas for us, we are most receptive and looking forward to any observations that you might have.
And perhaps while we wait for people to type their questions or to raise their hands, we can remind a little bit about the state of the project. So we are currently wrapping up this pilot phase. It has been a fantastic experience to work with all of you on this project. We will, as I mentioned, publish this guidance document likely around the fall. We hope to also launch it perhaps in a public event. There will be more announcement coming by. Watch this space for an important announcement coming up on Monday. And we will study, reflect, and establish the continuation of this project together with all of you and those that wants to work with us. Jordan, thanks so much for raising your hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Alberto, for this group and for your work that you're doing with WRI. I guess I was curious, I didn't hear anything really about kind of encouraging advocacy among faith communities and trying to, bring groups together in order to work toward policy, things like that. It's been more thinking about, at least from what I heard, kind of internal things that faith communities can do. And so I guess I wonder, are you guys thinking about that, or are there avenues that you see for kind of greater focus on that?
Would you like me to jump in, Alberto?
I was directly thinking of you, Susan.
Yes, and thank you for the question. And I didn't spend time reflecting on that today. I did yesterday in my remarks, but Interfaith Power and Light very much looks at this as a systems approach, right? Like we absolutely need to tend to our facilities and do the things internally that we need to do to show leadership. But absolutely, we work with individuals and faith communities all across the United States to provide policy advocacy. And because of our affiliate structure, we're able to do that, at the local level. So, public utility commissions and city councils and also state legislatures. And then we work extensively on federal policy advocacy, including administrative rules. So what the EPA is doing in terms of promulgating new safeguards. And then we also actually work at the global level through the COP, but primarily we see our role in that is pushing the US government to increase their ambition around global commitments. So again, for us, it relates to what's happening here in the US at the federal level. So completely agree with you that we cannot separate those things out, because we have to have the right policies in order to get where we need to be. So thanks for the question.
I would just add on to that, you know, one of the observations that we've had in this first research phase of the project is that many of the advocacy channels and many of the advocacy positions are actually well established, always being further strengthened, but already well established. And the fact that, you know, emissions reduction is really material, is really the focus of what we're trying to do in creating a data and evidence-based foundation for FBOs to advance their mission in so many different ways.
Can I just add the last bit? So the Episcopal Church of the Philippines wanted to use the results to advocate to others around them in the National Council of Churches. They saw it very much like that is one of the results that they want out of this whole process, in fact. So they have like the internal advocacy to all the different dioceses building the capacity, knowledge, and they have the external advocacy as part of the work that they want to do with this final report. So it's an ongoing and vital part of all the projects as I've seen it.
Thank you so much, all. And first of all, thanks a lot as well for all the comments and the links and the emails that you're putting in the chat. This is exactly the kind of interpollination of ideas and projects that we need to advance this type of work. And I also noted a question on finance. I think it was from Teodorina. Yes, how do you plan to finance the next steps? The elephant in the room, of course. I don't think, if I want to address this question, I feel obviously finding resources for organizations like WRI, JLI, Interfaith Power and Light, all the ecosystem for this project is certainly a challenge because there is not so much resources out there, but there are good willing individuals, foundations, organizations that are willing to support this type of work. I think what is perhaps even more complicated is to get the resources, to access the resources more at the local level. So in the parishes, in the communities, to form the capacities on the ground. Yesterday, Olivia put out a fantastic example on the work in the Philippines, that the trainers were being trained in a very systematic way, and that actually made it possible to perform a project even with minimum capacity, because those are not professionals. So I think that the challenge is more there, and we are working all as a community of practice to raise the profile of the faith-based organization engagement in this type of work, also to get better access to funding and to finances. So it's a work in progress that we're all doing together. I see more comments in the chat. A lot of comments. We have probably last 5-10 minutes if you want to run a little bit over. What do you think, Uwe?
Yeah, I mean, and any other questions? Comments?
We have a question from Karrik. It seems there is a consensus among these groups that there are opportunities for collaboration moving forward. Would you share some ideas of where you think these different actors from the faith and environment sector can work together for increased impact? What project would you find interesting? It's a very good question. Opportunities are out there. The collaboration between secular organizations and faith-based organizations is fairly new in the science sector, but it's always been there throughout society. So at WRI, for example, we are trying to develop engagements on different types of work streams, whether it's the work the faith-based organization are doing on cities, whether it's the work that they're doing to protect forests, the work on natural resource governance, think about all the conflict around the world, around nature, and what are the roles that faith-based organizations play, or indigenous communities. And so it's a huge sector, but we have to focus on what can be actually the added value that science and secular organization at WRI can give. Because as we mentioned, the resources are scarce, and we need to listen, as Dolores just also said in the chat, to those that there are the needs at the local level. You know, if you want to add anything else, Uwe or others.
Well, I just want to echo my colleague Megan Chappell, who offered her reflections on this yesterday in the forum, and that is that, you know, now is not the time to take small steps. We can't let the absence of resources be the alibi for not acting, and so let's find a way.
From our experience, the Episcopal Church of the Philippines had worked with the University of the Philippines before, not on this exact, survey approach, but these religious institutions are well networked. There are climate scientists in the religious institutions. There are engineers in the religious institutions. They're working, ECP is also working separately on this solar project, and they're engaging with other people on that. So I think that the networks do exist, but I think it is projects like this where we're all coming together and creating that momentum at certain points that allow us, for example, just to catch everyone at the right moment, as we did in the Philippines, to get these different groups on board and say, together we're going to do this now. So yeah, I think the networks are there, like ready and waiting and somewhat happening and bubbling up, and there's a I don't really want to say this because I hear it too much about the untapped resources of religion, but it's not untapped. It's just that some people haven't paid enough attention to it, and that's what needs to be changed. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Any final comment, remarks? I'm just so happy to have you all today here. This conversation was super enriching and interesting for us. It's the perfect way to close this pilot project of science-based target for faith, and we're gathering so many ideas for the next one that is making me very excited, Uwe.
Well, thank you, Alberto. I want to just, on behalf of Georgetown, thank the World Resources Institute. I certainly want to thank everyone here today. I want to thank everyone who participated yesterday. We look forward to sharing this information with people and exploring the way in which we can act boldly on this issue. Over to you, Alberto, for final remarks.
Just thanks everybody. Please stay in touch, reach out for contacts, for other discussions, for collaboration opportunities. Thanks so much for being here today, and this is to be continued, so stay tuned, and thanks for your support. Have a great day, afternoon, evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.